Yeah. Now, before I get into talking about this camera, which is a Williamson Kinematograph from around 1910, 12, somewhere in there, I'm going to talk about my favorite group of people, and it's the Genesis generation of movie makers. Now, those people were before the pioneers. Now, we all know the pioneers as Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin and D.W. Griffith. But somebody had to make movies before that, and that's the Genesis generation. And now that's a period from about 1894 or 5 up until around 1910. Now these are the people that figured out through editing how to manipulate the movie format to tell a proper story in a linear fashion and maintain a continuity that was understandable. It's such a simple concept that it's difficult for people from the 21st century to think that such an idea didn't exist in the Genesis generation. They actually had to conceptualize this editing style and make it work. Now, Thomas Edison and George Albert Smith were Genesis generation people, but probably the most brilliant group of all these early people lived and worked on the south coast of England. Today they're called the Brighton School of Filmmakers. They shot thousands of movies by 1906. They had invented and patented the color camera about 1897 or 8. They did the first panning of a camera, and they invented phantom rides, where a camera was put onto the front of a train or some other vehicle, and then they filmed while in motion. They made the very first blockbuster movie by 1912, and it was in color. The Brighton School had so many firsts because they invented the beginning of movies. One of the very first innovators was James Williamson. This is one of his cameras. He was brilliant in so many ways. He purchased a projector around 1897 and converted it into a camera and started making movies. At the time, they were called animated pictures. He made 39 films in 1898 and released the first films that were shot within the context of a continuing story through multiple locations. Attack on the China Mission and Fire are the earliest examples of that kind of editing. The editing style in Fire was one of the inspirations behind Edwin S. Porter's The Great Train Robbery. That was about 1903. All three of those films can be seen on YouTube. The Great Train Robbery, Fire, and Attack on a China Mission. Williamson invented the race against time scenario, and he promoted his films as not a trace of acting to be seen anywhere. Exaggerated pantomime was the norm in the early films. The Williamson Kinematograph Company is credited with making 222 movies in 13 years, starting in 1897 and ending around 1910. Now, Williamson had one of the first purpose-built movie studios in the world, constructed on his property in 1902. In 1907, he moved his company's headquarters to 27 Cecil Court in London. That was better known as Flicker Alley because there were so many movie companies there in Flicker Alley. Making movies got so expensive around 1909 that Williamson decided to end production and start serving the industry by making cameras and printers and projectors. His company seems to have gone out of business around the end of the Great War in 1918, and little can be found about James Williamson after World War I. He died in 1933, and he's buried in the Brighton Hove Cemetery. So this is a Williamson Kinematograph manufactured by Alfred Darling for James Williamson around 1910, 1912. Alfred Darling's logo is inside on the footage counter, And the camera looks like this when it's running. Now, all of the cameras from the period had the single frame cranks also, so they could do time lapse. So this is one frame, one crank here. And I'm going to open the front of the camera up and show you what it looked like when it was running. We get the key off the back of the camera, and we'll open up the front lens board, take it off. And this is what the camera looks like, single frame. And then we'll take the single frame shaft, crank off the single frame shaft, and we'll put it on the 8 frame. And this is what the camera looked like running at speed. Now this is a pretty spectacular camera. This camera was no shelf queen. This camera shot a lot of movies. You can tell by the kind of wear it has that it shot lots of footage, and that it had pride and ownership. Whoever owned this camera and worked it did a really, really good job of caring for it. It's gorgeous. So let's go over to the film box side, and we'll show you how the how you set focus on the camera. So this is a viewing tube, goes right between the two film boxes. And what you would do is you'd pull the film viewing tube back, open the pressure plate and aperture plate here. The pressure plate is glass, so you could actually view right on the film. When you got focused, you knew it was in focus. And now we'll go to the back of the camera, show you a little bit about the camera itself. And here's the back of the camera. The door key goes on the back of the camera. This is a tie-down screw. It holds the top film box in place. And this is the bottom film box tie-down screw. It's just a thumb screw, holds things in place. And this is how you got focus. You got your critical focus by looking through this tube. Once you have focus set, then you took your light trap plug and put it back in place, and then cranked your camera. So this is a Williamson Kinematograph early motion picture studio camera.